Hola amigos de More, bienvenido. Oh, sorry, this is our English live. Forgive me, friends of More. Welcome. This is our live, our English language live that we're going to be having every Monday. And today our topic is Trump. Trump saves the Ayatollahs. That's the title we gave to this live. And the reason for that title, my dear friend Yoel, welcome Yoel. Say hi to our
Welcome.
audience.
Thank you.
The reason for that title is that we've just witnessed what I think is a dramatic fact. In other words, a fact that is impossible to explain under the alternative hypothesis. In other words, the hypothesis that is not ours, right? The hypothesis that is not generated by management of realities model, by the Moore model, which is that Trump is a friend of Israel, right? That's what we consider the alternative hypothesis. That's the hypothesis the hypothesis that we don't like, that we think doesn't really explain the world. The hypothesis we think is the reasonable hypothesis, the one that does help us explain the world, is the one that says that Trump is an enemy of Israel, right? That Trump is promoting rather than fighting jihadism, and that Trump is closely aligned with the goals of jihadism, the most important of which is the destruction of Israel and then the destruction of the West. Now, when I started saying this, there was a lot of resistance. Of course, there still is a lot of resistance to this, partly because there's a very strong bias, that we inherit from consuming mainstream media and from our own education in mainstream academia and in our schools, because the mainstream media and our teachers and professors in the educational system are always inviting us to interpret the world according to the statements of public figures. So if Trump says that he hates Iran, the interpretation becomes Trump is an enemy of Iran. If Trump says that he's a friend of Israel, the interpretation becomes Trump is an ally of Israel, or more generally, the U.S. is an ally of Israel, right? And we believe that the public statements of public figures should never be the basis for geopolitical analysis, because politicians and other public figures don't express themselves in public in order to inform us. They express themselves in public in order to manipulate us. So in any particular communication, they may be saying the truth. That's certainly possible. But there's no reason that you should adopt the method of always assuming that they're telling you the truth. To the contrary, you should assume that most of the time they are manipulating you with some form of dishonesty. So the fact that Trump has publicly said that he's opposed to jihadism, that he's an enemy of Iran, that he doesn't want Iran to have nukes, that he's a friend of Israel, that he's, I think recently he said that the U.S. is Israel's number one ally by far, quote unquote. That's a direct quote. So those kinds of statements, in our opinion, are worthless as fundamental information with which to build a model of the geopolitical world. And before Trump became president, I began a series of articles, which I will share here for anybody who wants to take a look at them. So very briefly, this is the latest one. Trump saves the Ayatollahs. It's the one that corresponds to the title of today's live broadcast. But we have a whole series on it, on Trump. The first one if you go to part 1 here, asks the question: Is Trump a real person, or is he a character created by the deep state to capture the energy of the opposition, right? Because if you're the deep state, right, what do we mean by the deep state? We mean the CIA. We mean the intelligence services of the United States, which unfortunately were granted the power by U.S. citizens, by the U.S. Congress in 1947, to spend the money of the citizens in secret. Okay, and this is the key issue. Because the intelligence services can spend the money of the citizens in secret, and it's a lot of money because there is no greater concentration of money than the U.S. Treasury. So if they are able to spend the money of U.S. citizens in secret, which is the biggest pile of money in existence, well, then they have the power to corrupt just about any institution. So our model says, well, if you're the deep state and you want to stay in power permanently, obviously the thing you have to do is to, in addition to corrupt the various institutions of democracy, so that you can run them clandestinely, right? You in a simulation of democracy, in a manipulated simulation of democracy, you also want to control the opposition. It's very important to control the opposition, because if you don't control the opposition, then one day you may be out of power, right? If the opposition becomes popular, and the leader of the opposition is not someone you control, then if that person wins at the polls, then you're out of power. Now, of course, people in the United States who voted for Trump perceive that this is what happened when they voted Trump into office, right? When Trump became the president, the people who voted for him think that this means that there's been a kind of a revolution going on. But that's not true if Trump is really a creature of that deep state. And that's our hypothesis. So before Trump was inaugurated president, we published that first piece on our Substack, asking the question, well, is he really, is he for real? Is Trump for real? Or is he controlled opposition? Is he a character created by the deep state to become attractive, to seem like he's a real opponent of the system, so that the people who are upset with the system, who are fed up, with trans ideology, with the woke business, who are fed up with Biden's policies in the Middle East, who are fed up with the corruption of things like USAID and other elements of the deep state that are financing all kinds of questionable movements around the world and institutions and so forth. Anybody who's upset with all of that will vote for Trump if they perceive that Trump is on their side. So the idea is, from the deep state, you produce a candidate that seems independent, that is carefully crafted to seem like he's a strong enemy of the deep state. But of course, he's a member of the deep state. And then when people vote him into office, the deep state stays in power, right? When we published that piece, we defended our own hypothesis, the Machiavellian hypothesis. And we predicted that if we were right, then Trump's policies in the Middle East would not be pro-Israel. They would be pro-jihad. Okay? This is our prediction. Now, how did this prediction do? All along in our series, we have because it's now 6 articles long, we have been presenting the evidence that Trump has in fact been very strongly pro-jihad and very strongly anti-Israel. And there's different things we can point to. For example, he forced Israel to a ceasefire in Gaza when they were winning the war. He forced them to retrench in Lebanon when they were winning the war in Lebanon. He has a very tight alliance with the Qataris, who are the financiers of international jihadi terrorism and the sugar daddies of Hamas, along with Iran, right? So he's a big promoter of Qatar, has a very strong alliance with Qatar. Qatar is host to the U.S.'s most important military base in all of North Africa, the Middle East, and Central Asia. And these are the jihadi daddies, right? So if he's anti-jihadi, what is he doing being so closely allied with Qatar? What is he doing sending billions of dollars in weapons to Lebanon, which is controlled by Hezbollah? What is he doing arming Egypt to the teeth, Saudi Arabia to the teeth? But now we have the most dramatic evidence, which is Iran. Because what happened with Iran? Trump, on a previous occasion, when Israel was getting ready to attack Iran, Trump stopped them. Trump stopped Israel from attacking Iran. Now, why would he do that?
Israel was winning.
I'm sorry?
Israel was winning, and Trump stopped them.
Well, Israel had already destroyed Iran's air defenses, right, in a previous attack. So it was a sitting duck. And Israel could easily go in and destroy its nuclear infrastructure and its oil infrastructure, as Israel just demonstrated, right? So Israel was getting ready to attack, and Trump stopped them. Now, why would you stop them? I mean, if you're an opponent of jihadism, then you should be glad that Israel wants to attack Iran, because it doesn't cost you very much, right? I mean, if Israel is the one that takes the risk, and they're the ones that go and destroy Iran, and you didn't want Iran to have nuclear weapons, and you didn't want jihadism to be strong, right? Well, then the best thing that could happen to you is that Israel goes and destroys Iran. Why would you stop them? But even more telling, he stopped Israel so that he could start a process of negotiations, he said, with Iran. Now, the context in which he did this is quite revealing, because Iran already had what they call breakout time at zero. In other words, it was a matter of weeks, maybe months, for Iran to assemble finally the nuclear bomb so they could drop it in Israel. So Trump says, you got 2 months, you got 60 days to sign total nuclear disarmament, or we will destroy you. That's the framework that Trump established for negotiations with Iran, which the strategic structure of that is easy to understand. I mean, if you're a jihadist and the entire meaning of your existence is the genocidal destruction of Israel, which it is, then when Trump tells you you got 60 days to sign total nuclear disarmament, well, what you're going to conclude is that you're going to try to use those 60 days to finish your bomb and drop it on Israel, because it's the last chance to do so, right? And you don't have to be a genius to understand this. Everybody in the Pentagon obviously understood that this is how the jihadis in Iran were going to process this policy. So the policy is designed to drop a nuclear bomb on Israel. Now, if there were any doubts about Trump's true orientation, and I forgot to mention something very important, which is that U.S. spies on another occasion leaked top secret intelligence about Israel's impending attack against Iran to the Iranians. That also happened. That's also consistent with our hypothesis. But as I said, what really rises to the level of a dramatic fact, in other words, a fact that is impossible under the hypothesis of Trump friendship towards Israel or alliance with Israel and enmity with jihadism and Iran, is his behavior after Israel initiated the attack. Because it really seems like the attack caught Trump unawares, right? He was blindsided by Israel's attack. And his reaction, his immediate reaction, was to try and stop the war. Why would you do that? I mean, he had given you. So let's say that we accept the presentation, right? Let's say, for the sake of argument, we accept the presentation. He said you have 60 days, and then I'm going to destroy you. Well, Israel attacked on day 61. And if Israel destroys Iran, well, they're doing a favor to Trump, right? So he no longer has to risk anything to destroy Iran. Israel is doing it for him, right? So why would he, when the 60 days are over and Israel starts attacking Iran, why would he try to stop them? He himself had said that Iran would be destroyed on day 61. So I think that his frantic reaction to stop the war is quite telling. And of course, it was very difficult for him to stop the war because everybody has to act within their own political grammar. Okay, so if you're the president of the United States, the political grammar in the United States is modern Western democracy. It's liberal democracy. So you have to pretend to be a Democrat, even if you're not. You have to work within that political grammar. Okay, you can't be you can't be, for example, defending theocratic arguments as a U.S. president, because that's not the grammar. In Iran, it's a completely different grammar. There, you would defend theocratic arguments because that's the Islamic Republic, right? And the whole point of the Islamic Republic is to defend, is to destroy what they call the Zionist entity, the state of Israel, right? That's the entire meaning of Iranian jihadism. That's the reason for existence is the destruction of Israel. So that makes it very difficult for Trump to stop the war once it starts, because after the Iranians got attacked so hard by Israel, well, the Ayatollahs have to reply. They have to reply, because if they don't reply, then all of the true believers in the jihadi structure of Iran would be outraged. Why are we not replying? And if they had surrendered like Trump wanted, then the Ayatollahs might have gotten their heads cut off, because how are you going to surrender to Satan? They think Israel is Satan, right? The whole point of their existence is to redeem the world by destroying Israel in genocide. They're not going to surrender to Israel. So Trump couldn't get them to surrender, which means he couldn't get them because of the internal political grammar of Iran. So if he couldn't get them to surrender, he couldn't protect them, because the only way to stop Israel for Trump, the only way to stop Israel is if Iran surrendered. While Iran is throwing missiles at Israeli cities, the political grammar of the United States made it impossible for Trump to simply impose a ceasefire on Israel, because he's supposed to be Israel's ally. So within that grammar, it would have made zero sense. Everybody would have realized that Trump was an enemy of Israel if he had ordered Israel to stop while Iran was throwing missiles at Israeli cities, right? So he tried, but he couldn't get it done. So what did he do? What did he do in order to stop Israel from destroying Iran? He entered the war. He entered the war as a co-belligerent against Iran and dropped just enough bombs so that he could take narrative control of the war and then impose a ceasefire on Israel.
Yes.
But the structure of this is very clear. If you impose a ceasefire on Israel, on both, obviously, but if you impose a ceasefire on both, when Israel is beating the crap out of the Ayatollahs, which is what was happening, well, then you're protecting the Ayatollahs. You're saving the Ayatollahs. And amazingly, This is precisely what Trump said he was doing in his Truth Social posts. He said that he was trying to save the Ayatollahs. He even said that he was trying to save the Iranian Empire. And this is after he threatened, this is after he promised that he would destroy them, right? So you have to, so you have two different positions. You have to decide which one is true, because he said both. So on one occasion, he said, I'm going to destroy Iran. And on another occasion, he says, I want to save the Iranian Empire. So which one is reality? Well, notice when Trump dropped a few bombs on Iran to take narrative control of the war, he immediately told the Iranians, don't fire back. If you fire back, I will unleash everything on you. You have never seen the kind of disaster that I'm going to bring on you, right? And he threatened them in all capital letters, like an adolescent, trying to be very scary, right? Because of course, if Iran replied with missiles against U.S. positions, then Trump would be forced either to reply, right, to protect the political grammar, to protect the whole management of that reality for American citizens, right? Or he would have to hold his fire and pull his mask off. And that's what happened. Even though Iran threw some missiles at U.S. positions, Trump held his fire. He didn't fire back. Despite all his threats, he didn't fire back. And he did that so that he could impose a ceasefire. And what that means is that he's a pro-jihadi. I mean, so this is, there. In my view, there's no other interpretation that explains this, because he was under Iranian fire when he imposed the ceasefire.
I have a question here, Francisco, because what you're saying is basically that the elites from the US, Trump and the deep state, are in contact and are in an alliance with the regime, the Iranian regime.
Well, the question of contact is more controversial than the question of support. So it is possible that Trump is supporting jihadism without the jihadis really understanding that. That's possible.
Okay.
But it's also possible, like you just said, that they're all pretending in public, and in secret they're actually communicating. That's also possible.
Okay. So what's your position in that? What do you?
Well,
think?
I think it's very difficult for the Iranian jihadis not to understand that the U.S. bosses are allied with jihadism, right? I mean, they would have to be complete imbeciles,
Yes.
right? I mean, so if the United States has its most important military base in Qatar, which is the source of funds for jihadism internationally. I mean, if you can't reason from that, then you just can't reason. But that's not the. But that's just one detail. I could give you a whole list of them. So think about Iran-Contra in the 1980s, right? So people have now forgotten Iran-Contra. We have a whole series on it. Let me show people. In case they want to learn about Iran-Contra, because it's diagnostic of the whole system. So if you go to Management of Reality, you go to the archive, and you say, I'm interested in Iran-Contra, right? You can get a whole education on what this was, right? What happened here? What happened is that this guy, Ayatollah Khomeini, takes power in 1979 and initiates the jihadi regime that is still running Iran, okay? And this guy, Ronald Reagan, okay, Ronald Reagan, he had campaigned because he became president right after Ayatollah Khomeini became the supreme leader of Iran. And in the presidential campaign, his entire presidential campaign was to criticize Jimmy Carter for not getting sufficiently tough on the Iranian jihadi regime. And he promised that he would kick the ass, he would kick Iranian ass, he would show them, he would show Iranians who's boss, blah, blah, blah. That was his whole presidential campaign. And then when he became president, the first thing he did is he started sending billions of dollars in weapons in secret to Ayatollah Khomeini, right? Well, that obviously that means that he is pro-jihad, right? Of course, when he got caught in 1986, this all became public. Thanks to the Arab press, actually. This was discovered by a Syrian newspaper, and then it became an international scandal. Or a Lebanese newspaper. I forget if it was Lebanese or Syrian. Anyway, the name of the newspaper is Al-Shira. And once it became public, what Ronald Reagan and his team said is, we're sorry, but we were trying to do a good thing. We were trying to free American hostages held by Hezbollah in Lebanon. And since Hezbollah is a creation of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, we were sending billions of dollars in weapons to Ayatollah Khomeini to see if we could, in this way, beg Khomeini to lean on Hezbollah to free, 5 American hostages in Lebanon, which is ridiculous. But it couldn't even be true in principle, because later investigations demonstrated that the secret arms shipments to Iran had begun in 1981. The first Hezbollah hostage in Lebanon was taken in 1982. So the decision to start sending weapons to Iran had absolutely nothing to do with the hostages. Okay, nothing. So if you're but not only that, if you look at the sequence of events, you'll see that while the U.S. was sending all of these secret arms to Iran, yes, a couple of hostages were released, but then they took new hostages. So there's no relationship between sending arms to Iran and releasing hostages. That didn't happen. The weapons were not doing that. They weren't getting hostages released. So there's no way that this story makes any sense. The only story that makes sense is that the bosses had a pro-jihadi policy. Now, consistent with that is that 10 years later, in 1989, a document was created by Graham Fuller, who was a CIA analyst. This document was created for the RAND think tank, which is a Pentagon think tank. And what this document said is that in order to solve, quote unquote, the Arab-Israeli conflict, PLO Fatah had to be given Judea, Samaria, and Gaza. Okay, so this is the document that produced the if you will, the theory for the Oslo so-called peace process. And this policy succeeded. So in 1993, just a few years later, the U.S. got Israel and PLO Fatah to sign the Oslo process, and PLO Fatah was brought inside Israel to Judea, Samaria, and Gaza. Judea and Samaria is what the media calls the West Bank, right? So they brought them in to this militarily strategic territory, and they knew what they were doing because it's not difficult to document what PLO Fatah is. It's just that the public is never informed. But it's easy to find out if you're interested in answering the question. PLO Fatah is the creator of jihadi Iran. This was on the front page of the New York Times in 1979 when Ayatollah Khomeini took power in Iran. And we have an article about that. So those of you who want to read about this can go to the Substack of Management of Reality. And for some reason, I see. You can look for, if you type in Iran, it'll be the first result. Okay? So this article is called War is Peace. Did the U.S. force Israel to cede strategic territory to Iran? And so what we document here is that Yasser Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas armed and trained Ayatollah Khomeini's guerrillas in training camps in Lebanon in the 1970s. That's Yasser Arafat right there. That's Ayatollah Khomeini. This is immediately after the Iranian Revolution. Ayatollah Khomeini sent an airplane to go pick up Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas and a few other top leaders of PLO Fatah so that they could come to Tehran to celebrate with Ayatollah Khomeini the Iranian Revolution. And from Tehran, they promised together that they were going to destroy Israel. And they even explained to the Arab reporters in Tehran what the strategy would be. They said, we're going to promise peace so that Israel will give PLO Fatah territory inside Israel, and then we will use that territory as a beachhead for the destruction of Israel. They explained all that. Okay? This was all on the front page of the New York Times. Front page of the New York Times.
Wow.
Okay? And I give the sources in the article so that people can go check them. All right? So obviously the U.S. bosses were following a pro-jihadi, pro-Iranian policy. This is what they were doing. It wasn't just one thing. It's not just Iran-Contra. It's Iran-Contra plus the destruction of Iraq, okay, because the U.S. the big rival of Iran was Iraq. And so what the U.S. did is it went in, destroyed Iraq, and Iraq became essentially the westernmost province of Iran. We explained that in one of the articles in the Trump series. We explained that Iran basically inherited Iraq because the U.S., when it went in, invaded Iraq. What they did is they installed in power in Iraq a Shiite government that was controlled from Iran. So Iraq is 60% Shiite. Before the U.S. invasion, there was a Sunni minority governing. That was Saddam Hussein. But after the invasion, the U.S. bosses installed in power a Shiite government controlled from Iran. So they gave Iraq to Iran. Then they have their center of operations in the Middle East in Qatar, which is a jihadi power center, right? They introduced the daddy of Iran, PLO Fatah, into militarily strategic territory of Israel. And now we see that it was very obvious that Obama was protecting Iran and that Biden was protecting Iran. But now we see that Trump has the exact same policy, which is perfectly consistent with the model that says that Trump is a creature of the deep state, and with the aspect of our model that says that the deep state has had a consistent pro-jihadi policy for more than 40 years.
Wow. But coming back to one point that you said before, it was that this was said by a very important and intelligent man a long time ago, who was Maurice Joly, right, who predicted and all of this, right? Like
Well,
the
so
deep state.
the part of the deep state, yes. So Maurice Joly is a political thinker. He's a political theorist from the late 19th century, and he explained in 1864 is when he published his book. His book is called Dialogue in Hell Between Machiavelli and Montesquieu. So we have an article on that. Let me put it up on the screen for people. So Maurice Joly wrote this book, Dialogue in Hell Between Machiavelli and Montesquieu. I don't know if I have a photo of the cover of the book. Let me see. I don't think I put it there. I should. I will. But this is Maurice Joly, and his theory is the theory, what I call the theory of counterfeit democracy. In other words, this is the theory that we're living in a democratic simulation. What he said is, look, if the citizens allow the bureaucrats running the government to spend the money of the citizens in secret, in other words, if the citizens allow the creation of a clandestine service, then we won't have a real democracy, because the intelligence services will use that secret money to corrupt the entire system. And from that point onwards, they'll just be manipulating us. They'll be controlling all of the media outlets. They'll control the educational system. They'll control the political parties, the civil society organizations, and so forth. And to give you an example of how that works, we have several articles on this, but an example of how the capture of these organizations works. We focus on the National Student Association, because this became a huge scandal in the late 1960s in the United States, when a relatively small magazine, Ramparts, exposed that the National Student Association, which was the biggest student association in the United States, was a CIA front. Okay, so they had used the secret money of the CIA to take control of the student movement. This is what they were doing. So, and after Ramparts did this investigation, there was a slew of further investigations that documented that the CIA had done this with the entire US system. But this is not part of the education that people receive in the United States or generally in the West. People don't know that. They don't know about this anymore. They don't know. For example, I'm going to give you another example of what they don't know. Once these investigations began, let me just find this article. Oh, here we go. Another scandal that developed, and this was all documented in the U.S. Congress, by the way, is that the U.S. Army had been spraying experimental bioweapons on U.S. citizens. Millions of U.S. citizens were sprayed. Okay, this is just a completely frightening crime against humanity. This is incredible. It's on the level of the Nazi medical crimes, except that the Nazis and the Japanese were doing medical experiments on a few thousand people. These guys did it on millions of their own citizens. Wow. Okay, and people still don't know about this. They don't learn about this in school. It's not a secret. If you research this on the internet or in your library, you'll find it right away. It was documented in the U.S. Congress, but nobody is told about this in the course of their education. So people don't have a proper historical consciousness in the United States about what their own system has been. So yes, Maurice Joly explained this structure back in the 19th century, but we've never been able to learn this because, Maurice Joly, what he was doing, he was not really doing theory in a vacuum. Maurice Joly was describing what was already happening in the government of Louis Napoleon Bonaparte in the French Second Republic, which became the so-called liberal empire. Louis Napoleon Bonaparte was already doing everything that Joly was warning about. See, it was already happening, and Joly was just describing it. But of course, Louis Napoleon had Joly arrested. He threw him in prison. He confiscated all the copies of Joly's book, and it disappeared from circulation. And then something very, very Machiavellian happened, very dark, because the style of Joly's book was like Plato's dialogues. So the Greek philosopher Plato had this style of exposition where he would have one character defend one view, and then another character defends a contrary view, and they debate it, and then whoever is Plato's favorite, which is always Socrates, wins the argument, right? So Maurice Joly had a similar structure. In his book, Montesquieu is the character defending the view that we now have stable democracies because the Western revolutionaries have divided government into several powers, like Montesquieu wanted. And so Montesquieu says, look, it's all done. We succeeded. We have modern democracy now. Tyranny can no longer return. And Montesquieu, the character of, forgive me, Machiavelli, the character Machiavelli dominates the rest of the book. And he spends the rest of the book laughing at Montesquieu, explaining to him how all of the structure of democracy is going to be corrupted clandestinely because the citizens have allowed the government to create a secret service, to create an intelligence service that spends our money in secret, right? So the very dark thing that happened is that after Joly's book disappeared from circulation because Louis Napoleon confiscated all copies of the book, towards the end of the 19th century, the French anti-Semites, in particular Edouard Drumont, who was the supreme leader of French anti-Semitism, he had a copy of Joly's book. He was one of the few people who had kept a copy of Joly's book, and he gave it to the Russian secret police, the Okhrana. And the Okhrana grabbed the discourses of Machiavelli, and with those discourses, they created a new document that they called the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. And this document pretends to be the minutes of a secret meeting of some super Jews who, in secret, control everything. They've corrupted all the institutions of the West. But see, it's really the discourses of the character Machiavelli in Joly's book. That's where they took it from. They just modified it a little bit so that it would seem that it was the super rabbi who was giving the speech. And then they published that book under the pretense that these were that somebody had found the minutes of this meeting of these super powerful secret Jews that controlled everything. In that document, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion became the let us say the spinal column of the anti-Semitic propaganda of the Russian Empire, which was employed to scare everybody about the Jews and motivate mass killings of Jews in the Russian Empire. These are called pogroms. And then the Protocols became the spinal column of anti-Semitic propaganda all over the West. It became very important in Nazi propaganda, but also in anti-Semitic propaganda elsewhere in the West. So, a book that was meant to warn us of the dangers of totalitarianism and the deep state, which is Maurice Joly's book, became in the hands of the anti-Semites a tool to move the entire social system of the West in the direction of anti-Jewish genocide. And we have an article about that too. So let me just so that people know where it is. If you go to our Substack and you type in the archive protocols, it'll take you straight to the article. And here we explain understanding the protocols is understanding modern anti-Semitism, because the claims in the protocols are that, you know, the secret conspiracy of Jews controls the media, controls finance, controls the workers' movements, the capitalist industries, the Western governments, everything. And the Jews are supposedly going to use this secret power to destroy Christian civilization. That's the propaganda, right? So if you understand the story of the protocols, then you understand why so many people still today believe that the Jews control the media, the Jews control finance, the Jews supposedly control the foreign policy of the United States, right? Which, you know, I mean, you have to be a bit simple-minded to really believe this, because if the Jews really control the media, then how come everybody believes that Israel is the bad guy? You'd think that the Jews, if they controlled the media, would be representing matters in a more favorable way to themselves, no? But the media is incessantly producing this perception that Israel is the bad guy. Because, I mean, think about it. If you're an ordinary person like you, like me, like, you know, we don't have access to reality. We don't have access to reality at all. We witness almost nothing of our own eyes and ears. Almost nothing. Not even our own families. Most of the information we have, even about our own families, is secondhand gossip because we don't get to witness it. We witness almost nothing. So whatever you think is true about Israel and the Arabs and so forth is what you get through the media and through your professors, because you have no direct access to that. So if you think that the Jews control the media, then obviously you're getting this from the media. You can't get it from anywhere else, which then means that no, if you think that Israel is the bad guy, right? You're getting this view from the media. You can't get it from anywhere else. You don't have direct access to reality. So if the media is making you think that Israel is the bad guy, how reasonable is it to say that the Jews control the media? Isn't the first hypothesis there that the enemies of the Jews control the media? And by the way, it is now relatively well known for people who look into it, and our audience can go look into it if they wish. And we have an article about this too, that the academic system has been corrupted by Qatar, right? This is now relatively famous. We discuss Qatar in this article. Let me put it up for people who want to. Well, we have two articles on this. One is an article we wrote about this very interesting interview that I did with Alexander Popkov when I was in Israel recently. We talk about the relationship between the U.S. and Qatar in that article mostly. And then we have this other article in which we talk about what Qatar is, because most people are not aware that Qatar is a modern slave state. 94% of the economically active population in Qatar are bona fide slaves. They have a master. They can't leave. They're physically and sexually abused, and they do all the work. They're thrown on the street when they're no longer needed. They die of hunger and so forth, because the Qataris are jihadists, and the jihadists are in the business of making slaves. So, but the point I was going to make about Qatar is that it has now been established that Qatar has been corrupting the top universities in the United States. They've been spending billions corrupting the educational establishment in the United States. So we've seen all kinds of protests on US campuses against Israel and in favor of the jihadists. Why is that? Well, because the professors at these universities have been teaching the students that Israel is the bad guy and that the jihadis are the good guys. And the students don't know any better. What do they know? They don't know anything. And they arrive at the university, and of course, they're very excited to be at these elite universities, right? It makes them feel very important. And they know that in order to get a good grade, they have to please their teachers, who are supposed to be geniuses. Otherwise, why are they teaching at these elite universities? So if you enter one of these universities as a naive student, you worship your professors. And if they tell you that Israel is the bad guy and that the jihadis are the good guys, and that in order to redeem yourself as a good leftist, you have to attack Israel, well, that's what you do. And you raise the anti-Israel flag in order to be recognized in your cultural university environment as a good person. You do that, right?
Yes.
But that's not because the Jews control the universities, right? It's not. It's because the enemies of the Jews control the universities, and they control the media.
Yes.
So this is what has happened. Why? And coming back to Trump and to the U.S. bosses, why would they have such a strong military alliance with Qatar? And why would they be allowing all this Qatari money into the U.S. university system if they're not allied with jihadism?
Francisco, there is some rumors going on that Trump is going to win the peace prize, right? Like the Nobel
Peace Prize.
Yeah. So what do you think about that? Is maybe what he did in the Iran-Israel war was a strategic way to be seen as a well-deserved man for the Nobel Peace Prize. What do you think about that?
Well, okay, so then the hypothesis here would be that Trump stopped the war because he loves peace and because he's interested in getting a peace prize, a Nobel Peace Prize. But the problem with that hypothesis is that it is entirely naive about what these people are doing. U.S. bosses are playing for world power. When you're playing for world power, you don't care about a little prize or about a big prize. You're playing for world power. World power. I mean, this is what they care about. And if you're playing for world power, you don't dick around with trivial stuff. This is not how you make decisions. Right? It's absurd to think that Trump stopped the Israelis because he wants a peace prize. I mean, look, if you get rid of the Ayatollahs, liberate Iran, because the Iranians don't want the Ayatollahs. So you liberate the Iranian people, allow them to flourish as a free people, and you destroy the Iranian nuclear program. That's the biggest achievement for world peace that you could possibly make.
Yes.
That would be the policy that would deserve the Nobel Peace Prize. So even if Trump was only interested in a Nobel Peace Prize, the way to really deserve it would be to eliminate the possibility of nuclear war caused by Iran. So the entire hypothesis is ridiculous in my view. It doesn't have a leg to stand on.
To change the regime.
Right. So you get rid of the Ayatollahs, you liberate the Iranians, you destroy any possibility of the Iranians having a nuclear bomb. Well, that's the best thing you could do for world peace. To eliminate the possibility of nuclear war in the Middle East is the best thing you could do for world peace. So the idea that you stop Israel from ruining Iran's nukes because you want the Nobel Peace Prize it's dead on arrival. It doesn't have legs to stand on. But again, it's completely naive about what these people are doing. The people who run the United States, first of all, the presidents are not running the United States. The United States is being run by the clandestine service. And the people making decisions, state-level decisions, in the most powerful country in history are not making those decisions so that somebody gets a Nobel Prize. Please, they're doing hyper-rational, cold, calculated, Machiavellian, geopolitical gamesmanship. That's what they're doing. Obviously, they're doing realpolitik. And therefore, none of their decisions can be explained in this silly way.
Nice. Okay. Perfect.
You got another one? Another alternative hypothesis to explain why Trump saved the Ayatollahs?
Look, the question I have now is like the king of the Iranians, Khamenei al-Hussein, is now like the no.
The supreme leader of the Iranians is Ali Khamenei.
I'm sorry, Ali Khamenei. I watched some videos of him shouting out loud, "Death to America!" Right. So if he's in an alliance and his objective wouldn't be much better, much more effective, just to Israel, not to America, not to get involved there, to have people in the U.S. against the.
But reality has to be managed. Reality has to be managed. So the people running the U.S. have to convince the citizens of the U.S. that they are enemies of jihadism. That is crucial. If U.S. citizens, imagine that tomorrow, Tuesday, millions of U.S. citizens, a majority of U.S. citizens, millions of people convince themselves that their own government is trying to destroy Western civilization by supporting jihadism. Imagine that tomorrow, Tuesday, millions upon millions of U.S. citizens, a majority of U.S. citizens, conclude this. They say to themselves, oh my God, the people running the United States are jihadists. If that happens, these jihadists running the United States will be removed from power. Because U.S. citizens do not want their government destroying Western civilization by promoting jihadism. They don't want that. So if they reached this conclusion, it would be over for the U.S. bosses. So reality has to be managed. And one way to manage it effectively is to have Ali Khamenei claim that he wants to destroy the United States. Because if Ali Khamenei says that in public, naive U.S. citizens will think, wow, then U.S. bosses must be the enemies of jihadi bosses, because they're always building geopolitical models on the basis of what people say. You see, if people are so simple and so innocent that they construct a model of the world on the basis of what people say, then all you have to do to fool them is to say certain things. So, of course, you have Ali Khamenei say death to America, and you have Trump say Iran will never be allowed to have nuclear weapons, and I'm going to go destroy Iran, blah, blah, blah. And once they both say that, simple-minded people will think, oh, they must be the worst enemies. And then you have Trump say, I love Israel, I'm the best friend, we're the best allies of Israel by far, blah, blah, blah. And they have Netanyahu say, the United States is our best ally, we love the United States, blah, blah, blah. And people simple-mindedly conclude, oh, well, then U.S. bosses must be the best friends of Israel. You see, if people construct a model of the world based on what public figures say, then it's cheap and easy to fool them. Why wouldn't you do it? You should do it.
Well, okay. Okay.
So we need to be more sophisticated. We need to learn to pay attention, not to what the people running the world say, but to what they do. And in particular, we must pay attention to the things they do that cost billions of dollars, because those are the things they really care about. Okay? That gives you an honest signal of how much they care. So if they go and destroy Iraq and they install an Iranian-controlled government in Iraq, and that maneuver costs them billions of dollars, which it did, then you know this is what they really care about. That's what they want. If they send billions of dollars in armament to the Iranian jihadis, that's what they want. That's billions of dollars worth. If they spend billions of dollars building their biggest base, their biggest military base in the center of international jihadi terrorism from the financial point of view, which is Qatar, well, that's what they want. That's what they care about.
Okay. So not just to look into what they do and not what they say, that's for sure, but also the result of what they do, right? Because they send you the error with the intention.
Right? Yes, I agree. I agree with that point. So the other thing we have to pay attention to is to the consistency in the results, because if they spend a lot of money supporting jihadism, and that was a mistake, then you would expect them to correct course, and the next time they do something, because they learned from the previous experience, then they get a different result, right? Because they made a mistake and now they're learning, right? But if they never learn, right? If over and over and over and over again, they spend billions of dollars each time, and the result each time is that the jihadists get stronger, then you should conclude that is their policy. Because the alternative is that they are such imbeciles that their intelligence is below that of a lab rat. You know, a lab rat, if you electrify one of the four walls of their cage and they touch it and they get shocked, they'll never touch it again. Because they're not idiots. They're rats, but they're not idiots, right? They can learn from experience. If you see the U.S. bosses doing the exact same thing over and over and over again, spending each time billions of dollars and obtaining every time the same pro-jihadi result, then they're jihadists.
Okay, that was a very interesting podcast, Francisco.
Well, I'm glad you liked it. I hope the audience liked it too.
Yeah.
Because we have to grow our English language channel. We'll see how it does.
Yeah. I think this message is very interesting for the audience. So many will. So please share the message, like it, subscribe if you don't already.
Yeah, do all that.
And
Subscribe, like, ding the little bell, and do a lot of sharing, because the call to action right now for ordinary people is to share, because as we just said, if millions of people in the West understand this, then it's game up. It's game over for the jihadis that are running the West. And we can talk about their other policies some other time. They're flooding Europe with jihadists. They're allowing Hezbollah to create jihadi positions all over Latin America. They're even importing many jihadis to the United States. They're doing all of that. So we really need to share, so that everybody becomes aware of this. And to share is revolutionary. George Orwell once said, "In a time of universal deceit," I'm quoting, he said, quote, "In a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act," end of quote. That's absolutely true. We live in a world now where information really is power. And the more people understand this, the closer we will be to saving Western civilization from the collapse that these people are trying to engineer. So don't think that you can't do everything, and don't think that it's okay to just listen. You have to respond with a call to action, which is to share, to get other people to understand. And if you want to give us money, give us money. That's great too. But people who don't have money can still share. So let's all do that.
Yes.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, we are the masses. In numbers, we win against.
Well, no, the masses can lose, but the masses will win if we use the enormous distributed power we have, thanks to the new tools of communication that we wield, to inform each other about what's going on. And the documentation is all in the website for people to go check. They should examine it skeptically, but once they are convinced that we are telling the truth, then our responsibility as citizens of the West who don't want to see our civilization collapse and who want to leave a better world for the next generations, what we need to do is communicate with our Western brethren all over Western civilization. And I think that's a good note for us to close this podcast, my dear Joel.
Yes, thank you so much. This was amazing. Thank you, the audience, for everything. And
we'll be in touch. See you next week.
bye.